I now welcome representatives from Save Victoria Park.
Wherever you choose, just help us up to the right.
So maybe sit here and here.
Good afternoon. We welcome Ms Rosemary O'Hagan and Ms Andrea Lunt to the microphone. So just a reminder to make sure you push on to be able to speak, and it'll light up red, and then turn it off when we'll finish speaking. Would you like to make a brief opening statement before the committee has questions for you?
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. So it's very important for us. We'd like to say that Save Victoria Park, if you don't know, is a community advocacy group working to protect Victoria Park, Barrambin, Brisbane's biggest inner city parkland, to ensure it is kept open, free and green for not just our generation but for generations to come. Today here we're talking about the POLA Bill, or the Planning and Other Legislation Amendment Bill. We contest that this bill is an affront to fundamental democratic principles. It seeks to silence and dismiss the voice of the community, stripping us of our democratic rights to have a say in or challenge major developments that will have a long-term impact on our lives and our livelihoods. It creates inequality. It increases community rights on one hand for those members of communities that are dealing with renewable energy projects, whilst at the same time completely bulldozing the rights and freedoms of those impacted by Olympic-related construction. The impact of Olympic infrastructure is by no means have a lower impact on a community than that of renewable projects, as was communicated on the 12th of May Bill and explanatory session. To drive this home, let me explain. Over the past year, we've heard a lot in the media about, oh, we can have a park and a stadium. Oh, the stadium will only take a small bit of the park. Our expert analysis has now indicates that at least 58% of Victoria Park, and that is a conservative figure, but 58% will be impacted by the Olympic infrastructure. So you've got swathes of the last remaining inner city parkland in a city with comparatively low inner city green space. Of all cities in Australia, Brisbane has the lowest, and internationally it also ranks low. So we're going to have swathes of those culturally important heritage-listed land, significant for First Nations, taken away in the name of an Olympics, which is supposed to be underpinned by sustainability principles. Victoria Park, Barrambin, is protected by law because it holds environmental, heritage and First Nations cultural value. That is without a doubt. What this Act will do by stripping away its protection under acts such as the Environmental Protection Act, the Heritage Act, the Nature Conservation Act, Planning Acts, this will ensure that Victoria Park Barrambin will transform now from a mainly free, open green space to a predominantly hard surface, pay-for-use commercial facility. This is exactly the opposite of what this park was granted to the people of Brisbane to be 150 years ago this year. We consider the bill justifications for this bill completely disingenuous. It tries to justify bulldozing 15 pieces of vital legislation, stating that it is required to meet Queensland's obligations with the International Olympic Committee. However, we would argue that this bill is changing the law to flout the agreements with the IOC. Why do we think this? Because the pre-election bid for the Olympics nominated Victoria Park as a site for increased greening, not permanent sports stadium construction. Secondly, we strongly contend that the POLA Bill is misleadingly marketed as being required for streamlining due to Labor's delays. This is not the reason for the bill. The reason for the bill is because the state picked Victoria Park as a stadium site despite knowing that it was legally protected, and therefore creates the need to get rid of the critical laws protecting the site. There were and are far more suitable sites for stadium construction. It is important to note that Victoria Park is a high-risk site, inherently unsuitable for stadium construction. It has a sloping terrain, it has hard granite, it's located in an already congested area with 5,000 school students. It is also next to the biggest hospital in the state. The cost of the build is at higher risk of budget blowouts and time delays. If the government was so concerned about delays for this Olympics, it wouldn't have chosen such a high-risk site. It would have chosen a brownfields-like site like they did in Sydney or in London. It would have chosen a flat site, or it might have gone with its actual pre-election promise of no new stadiums. A number of critical factors have to be highlighted. First of all, this bill circumvents the rule of law, and that is so important. If I decide to modify a Queenslander or knock down one fig tree, the impact on the environment, the cultural, the heritage of this city is going to be small in a grand scheme of things. But if I decide to build Olympics infrastructure where the risk, particularly in terms of Victoria Park, the magnitude is so great, the risk is more, we're getting rid of the safeguards. So the bill is completely illogical. Second of all, the gravity of the build will inevitably dominate the park. We have seen so many architects' renders of this, which makes the stadium look when it's surrounded by mature trees. This is misleading. It masks the enormity of the proposed build. The community has no idea of the real impact of these projects, yet they will be faced with the law being replaced by non-enforceable and undefined requirements and considerations that won't protect the park and will be subject to an arbitrary rule. This bill disregards the separation of powers. As a teenager, I sat and we talked around the dinner table in the Fitzgerald inquiry about the importance of the separation of powers. The fact that this doesn't allow judicial review is a retrograde step in terms of our whole legal process. And as elected members, you surely must understand the importance of that, especially in Queensland with what historically we've been through. The Olympics, we know, has a real bad history of incidents and allegations of fraud and corruption. The separation of powers and judicial review is the mechanism to ensure that this sort of corruption is at least able to be curtailed or identified and addressed. But what we're doing, even though we have heightened risk of corruption, is we're then dismantling the ability to control that through this bill. The application to the villages is really important because this is a really concerning part for us of this bill, because the villages are not listed as authority venues. Now that raises a really high risk. The POLA Bill does not specify any villages in its schedules. The removal of both the rule of law and the separation of power poses a significant risk of additional private sector developments encroaching even further on Victoria Park. So under the bill, the executive can make captain's calls on Victoria Park, the public land can be transferred to the hands of the private sector without public consultation. And we have seen that since March 2024 of people proposing more developments, private developments in Victoria Park under the guise of the Olympics. I also want to say this, and this is highly important, and following on from Sandra King's speech, that we've gone through this bill very thoroughly and we find it highly disrespectful to First Nations. The state chose this site. It clearly did not consult with First Nations. We've heard that this morning. They chose the site knowing it was important to First Nations culture and heritage, but they didn't want to get in their way of having this as a desired site for their stadium. They did not want to have the inconvenience of having to negotiate the best outcome for the members of this community, so they decided to truncate the consultation. So in conclusion, you will have seen an overwhelmingly negative response to the submissions as relate to Olympic infrastructure that you will have read through, hopefully, over the last few days. I understand that not all of them are up yet. We do not support this bill. We believe it's poorly conceived, represents a retrograde step for a society that values transparency, accountability and a true democratic process. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Andrea, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Go to the Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Rosemary and Andrea, for coming along today. The first question is simply this, that the Deputy Premier has said that this bill is about giving communities a voice and a stronger voice, but your submission said that you weren't consulted and that, in fact, you feel ignored. Do you think the government has lived up to its promise to empower local communities through this bill?
Well, it clearly doesn't. So we've actually said that it increases community rights for the people who are affected by renewable projects, but it strips us of our rights. So we don't get to have the same level of consultation as we would under the normal planning acts. The heritage and the culture and the environmental acts are discarded. So how can we be having a voice? And also judicial review is not able as an avenue for us to challenge what's happening, even though we don't know the magnitude of these bills. Andrea, do you have anything else to say?
I think I'll also add that in the bill, the government does acknowledge that the construction of these Olympic legacy venues are of utmost importance to Queenslanders, and they're going to be obviously impacting us for generations to come. So one would think that justifies increasing consultation with communities rather than stripping away rights to have a say in developments that are going to affect us and to appeal them in any way. To us, that seems illogical, and it creates, as Rosemary said, a sense of inequality because it's valuing the rights of the community members who are involved or affected by renewable energy projects over the rights of those who might be impacted by Olympic Authority venues.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just clarify a couple of things. You've said, Rosemary, in your opening address that there was 58% of the build. Where did you find that?
Okay, so we've got some experts who work in the background. You'll be speaking to Neil Peach later on. I think Neil's probably here already. And if you, actually, Andrea, you can talk to it.
So, yeah, Neil Peach is here and he's a researcher who came to that.
No worries.
That's all right, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I was interested to understand where
Yeah, no,
it came
that's fine.
from,
I'll let Neil go into it a bit more, but just as a pressy, we're relying on information in the GICA 100-day review, in addition to the government's delivery plan. So, and this is just for the main stadium. Initially, I'll take you through. So, for the main stadium, GICA has said they will need 32% of the park. So out of 60 hectares, which is a more accurate calculation of the land at the park, that's around 20 hectares. Now, it's unclear exactly what's included in GICA's 32% for the main stadium. But Neil has then done a comparative analysis with other Olympic stadium precincts around the world, taking into account critical factors like transport integration. And we know where the stadium has been proposed to be is in the middle of the park, which has no accessibility. It's going to need massive redevelopment in order to enable a stadium precinct. So Neil can talk further to this, but for the main stadium, he's then looked at comparative precincts around the world and come to this figure of 58%. And so he's done a comparative analysis for the main stadium and also for the aquatic stadium and combined those two together, and it comes to about 35 hectares that's required for both stadiums and their enabling infrastructure, and that is 58% of the park. So it's not a figure that's just been pulled out of thin air. There's been some investigation, quite in-depth, that's gone into it.
You recognise, though, that there's no actual agreed committed design for the project, and there is an opportunity to maximise the green space in that design.
Look, I think we've got to be very clear here that regardless of the design, an Olympic stadium is going to dominate that park. Olympic stadiums, as we know as well, have to have certain provisions. You're having a lot of people moving in and a lot of people moving out. This isn't just a bit of green space and then you walk in. Whatever they do in terms of putting a stadium, so now they're looking just not one but two, and you've got a warm-up track. You are going to basically have a stadium with maybe a little bit of greenery around it. The park, in the intents and purposes of being a park for which it was designed to be, might I add this park was originally 130 hectares and now we're down to 64, okay? The park is not going to be as it was. A park is not, it's going to be, somebody used the analogy and it's very true. It's like putting a billiard table in your lounge room, sticking some chairs around it and asking people over to your lounge room. It's a billiard table, it's a billiard room. So that is probably the best analogy I could use for this. That is going to be the domineering aspect of this. And also remember, this is hilly terrain. So that's even, you're going to have to flatten it, bulldoze it. You're going to have to, the amount of gravel and rock that's going to come out of that next to the Royal Brisbane Hospital, 5,000 school students. We do not understand why this site was chosen. Other than, somebody wanted an inner-city stadium, but there are other options, and I think that we need to look at the town planning respectfully for Brisbane and not just go, there's a bit of space and put it there. So, yeah.
No worries. I'll go to the member for Aspley.
Thanks, Chair. Given this bill allows the government to override existing planning and environmental laws, including processes that normally provide transparency and good public input, do you think there should be a requirement for genuine community consultation and clear public criteria for how this is going to be assessed and approved?
I think it's hard because there's a complete inconsistency here. Where's the middle ground? I mean, we talked on the 12th of May when I was listening to the session, they talked about requirements and considerations. I mean, they're not laws. Laws, what's the point in having a law? The Olympics is not more important than the law. We're not more important than the law. So what's the point in having laws if we're just going to replace them with considerations and maybe some requirements and then get the community to consult on them? It's this bill fundamentally, when it comes to Olympic infrastructure, is not right.
I think I'd also say that just speaking to the, I know there's several parts of the bill, speaking to the Olympic Authority venue part, which does reduce, as we can see, I know there's still some bits that need to be clarified. We think any kind of amendment that the government would accept to this bill would not be sufficient to protect Victoria Park Burrumbin as it should be protected by the law today. So I think that's just in terms of would we work within the bill to achieve our outcomes. I just don't think that anything we could put forward would be able to meet our objectives to protect the park.
Thank you. I'll go to the member for Cook for the next question.
Thanks, Chair. Rosemary, no matter where this venue went in Brisbane, there's always going to be discontent. We accept that, and I certainly understand how you feel. But at this stage of the game, sorry about that, at this stage of the proceedings, Geeka say that's the only feasible option for the stadium, given the time taken. So could and taking into account what Auntie said, could the last 1,200 days have been better utilised in greater community consultation and planning about where a stadium might go?
I think there's a lot of talk about the 1,200 days, etc., but we know there was a roadmap for this. We know that the first review by Graham Quirk, which happened over 60 days, was not based on true community consultation because nobody knew about the stadium. We met with Graham Quirk, 20 minutes on a Friday morning. We were talking about equestrian and BMX freestyle temporary venues as per the host contract that we thought that the Olympics was actually going to be underwritten by. So there was no community consultation. The stadium was put on the table by 1% of the submissions that went to Graham Quirk. It was then propelled into the stratosphere by a lot of people with a lot of influence. We will contest this stadium in Victoria Park should never have been put on the cards. It is unacceptable, and that's why we continue to fight this. There are other places in Brisbane that could have been used, are flat, less risky, and if you're concerned about delays, you wouldn't be putting it in Victoria Park because you are going to have increased risk of delays with that particular site.
Thank you. Go to the member for Bancroft.
Thank you. And I note that we've got Auntie Sandra and Louise Bonner back in the room. I think it's significant. I want to ask about the cultural heritage, environmental significance of the park there, and you talked about you had serious concerns about this proposal, as you talked about in your submission. Can you talk about what's at risk if these protections are bypassed and why the park holds such unique views?
Okay, we were talking about this before.
Yeah, I know. It's a little bit.
There is so much significance to this park. I mean, you'll know that there's heritage listings for a reason for this park, and they're under local, and they're also on the southern side under state, and the northern side has also been put forward for state heritage listing, and that doesn't come lightly. That's not someone just writing something through. That's years of work, and for it to get to this stage is very important. But before that, we know that there was centuries of history for First Nations, and that's clearly documented. So how that can be pushed aside for an Olympic Games where they're talking about First Nations, it doesn't show the respect, it doesn't show what I thought our society was. And for an Olympic Games, is this how we're showcasing the world, to be putting Olympic sites on heritage protected land, which is environmentally important in a city with comparatively hardly any city green space, which is important for our Indigenous communities. I every day wake up feeling dumbfounded that I'm even sitting here discussing this.
Thank you. Go to the member for Mulgrave for the next question.
Thanks, Rosemary. Following on from the last question, given that the bill still requires games venues to comply with the federal EPBC approvals, and your comments imply a lack of heritage protection, do you acknowledge, as outlined in the explanatory notes, that the bill continues the obligation for engagement and consultation with relevant stakeholders as well as the development of a cultural management plan.
Okay, so I'm just saying that it's all grey what that means. It doesn't match up to a law. A law is a law. A truncated process is not is just a truncated process.
Can I just
Yes.
ask, so with the, as I understand it, with the Cultural Heritage Management Plan under the bill, there's actually no requirement to meet an agreement with the custodians, and if there is not a consensus or disagreement, the proponent can default to what they have proposed anyway. So if there's no requirement for agreement, then I personally would not see that as true consultation, because there's no incentive for the proponent to actually be negotiating in good faith. So for us, if that's what the bill is proposing, then that's how we would view it. Mm-hmm. That's for the Aboriginal cultural heritage part of the bill, because there's no provision for community consultation or with other members of the community affected by the Olympic venues.
Member for Aspley.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, don't mind me. I'm just mopping up coffee I'm spilling on my laptop over here. I've tried to get my head around how the public transport links would actually work on this site. We've seen a lot of glossy brochures, but not actually any connections to, existing or new public transport. Do you have any idea in your mind how on earth this site's going to work in terms of public transport?
That's one of the factors that Neil Peach looked at, because some of the sites that have been recommended by GAICA are actually 1 kilometre away from Exhibition Station, which was not designed to handle stadium crowds. It opens tomorrow, I understand it, and it wasn't redesigned thinking that there would be a 63,000 seat stadium there. So what Neil did look at was how well integrated a stadium at Victoria Park would be into transport. And it wouldn't be. There would have to be a massive redevelopment around the park to enable a stadium precinct there to manage tens of thousands of people at a time. And remembering that Olympic crowds could be up to 120,000, there's the morning session, 60,000, changing over to the afternoon session of 60,000. So it's not just the stadium itself that's going to have the impact on the park. It's going to redevelop this park, which currently, I think not many people have been there because it was closed off for so long, but it's been opened up to the public for the last 3 years, and it's something my family and I have just treasured having in our backyard. It's this incredible green space that there's nothing else like it in Brisbane. There's beautiful green rolling hills, the history, you can feel the First Nations history there. There's Sacred Waterhole at Yorks Hollow for the First Nations. It used to be a place of springs and waterholes. That's why Spring Hill has its name. It's because this area was a place of waterholes and springs. It is such a special place, and putting an Olympic-sized stadium there and redeveloping it into pathways to deal with thousands of people, concourses, all the other amenities you need to deal with stadium crowds will be. The project itself will be enormous, and the cost, I mean, we can't really speak to the cost, but I can't imagine that the current prices the current price tags we've seen would be a ceiling. It's likely to be more of a floor.
Yeah, thanks again. I'd just like to go back to one of your opening statements about the contradictory nature of the bill. Are you aware that before this term of government, there was no requirement for renewable energy projects and in fact now all renewable energy projects will be impact assessable, and this bill enlivens the requirement to have social impact and community benefit, for all of those. So we're actually making that happen in those spaces, and those communities are very grateful for that. So that's actually the same thing. And again, this bill does, as the member for Mulgrave's question outlined, the obligation for engagement and consultation about, these things, and also the development of the cultural heritage management plan. So I don't think they're at opposite ends at all. We're enlivening that in terms of the renewable energy projects, and there's still a requirement for this obligation of consultation here.
But you're strengthening one and watering down the other, more than significantly watering down the other. So you're strengthening this and push it, so people over here get more rights of consultation.
Well, there
and we're
was
stripped
none.
of those rights, so that it's inconsistent.
Yeah, there was none though in that
Yeah,
space.
and that's
It was a free-for-all.
yeah. So, but what we're saying is that you're increasing that and decreasing this, and assuming that the people who are impacted by renewable energy, that's more significant for them. Whereas the disproportionate number of people that are going to be impacted by Olympic Stadium developments, not just now but in the future in a growing population, is significant. So that's what we're saying, is that one increases for these people, but it strips us of our rights.
Okay. Member for Cooper.
Sorry, I nearly jumped in. Thank you, Chair. I'm not in your electorate. I'm very close to it, and I'm very aware of that area. Our boundary is very close to, and I am aware that when people move into these areas, they are doing it looking at planning codes and heritage acts. They are very aware of what they're moving into and the type of area they want to buy into. I guess I just wanted to ask you about whether that's come up in your consultation with your members. Is that frustration that those codes have now been completely abolished, essentially, and also whether that's what you're alluding to when you mentioned there's going to be delays? Is part of that going to be kind of legal challenges to this? Like, can you expand on the delay part as well?
So what we're saying is, in terms of, firstly, just in terms of delays, so we hear this stuff, well, we have to streamline this and we have to move forward and make sure there's no other delays. What we're saying there is you are choosing with Victoria Park an inherently risky site. It's tough granite, it's sloping terrain, it's not naturally suitable for a stadium. Therefore, you increase your risk of delays and budget blowouts. If you build on a flat land, that you didn't have to worry about the laws because it wasn't zoned for heritage protection, it didn't have First Nations, cultural importance, we wouldn't have to be sitting here now. So what I'm saying is there's going to be delay, there's probably, if you're looking at the risk of delays with Victoria Park, the risk of budget blowouts, the risk this will cost the taxpayers so much more money is inherently higher because you've chosen Victoria Park than if you'd chosen elsewhere. In terms of the other delays, as you will know, we are still going down the path of challenging this on any legal front possible. This land is too important for Brisbane to lose, not just for our generation, but for every single generation to come. If we lose this, it's gone for good, and you can't protect it with a stadium.
Thank you very much, Andrea and Rosemary. The time for this session has now eroded very quickly. Thank you for the representation that you've made for your community. There is no questions on notice, I believe. No. So thank you very much.
Thank you.